I'm reminded of W.H. Lawrence for the last lesson of the afternoon, but I guess it is worth the trouble because it is on a topic, on a discipline I would call it now, which is very dear to all our hearts and which is the most essential one for any language and a language community to survive in today's world. Since this is related to translation, I invite all the panelists, if necessary, to switch into any language understandable to our audience, and that would be Konkani and Hindi in addition to English, if there is need. We're talking about the translation dilemma, and we have been listening to translator as traitor, translator as game changer. These are some of the terms we have used. How do we look at translation? One way would be to look at it as par kaya pravesh, and the second would be to look at the work as kaya kalp. These have been notions that some theorists have used. But before we go to this discussion, I would like to ask each of our panelists in that order, what do you feel about translation? And if there are any dilemmas, which are those that you have encountered foremost in your careers? Shall we begin with the lady?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. It's convenient to hand over the mic. It's on. It's on. It's on.
I will begin with the two Hindi phrases which Professor Kiran used, par kaya pravesh and kaya kalp. Well, in my case, it is only par kaya pravesh. It cannot be kaya kalp, because with kaya kalp we associate rejuvenation. With kaya kalp we associate an improvement. I don't think my translations can be an improvement to the original. But see, why I have translated is because our language is very little known outside its own region. And in fact, the state of Jammu and Kashmir has 3 languages. And the other 2 regions, that is Jammu and Ladakh, also do not speak Kashmiri. So this language is confined to the valley of Kashmir and some areas in the other regions. And so it's not very well known, though it has a great literature, huge history of written literature from the 14th century onwards. But it's hardly known except for a couple of poets like Lal Del. Lal Del everybody has heard of because she's been translated in the early 20th century, late 19th century also. First translated into Sanskrit and then translated into English by other people, but none of the people who translated her into English were Kashmiri speaking. These were people who were foreigners first of all. But I thought that only a Kashmiri can actually understand all the nuances and all the kind of references and the kind of sociological connotations of what she is saying. So that is why I took up translation. And another thing that motivated me to translate is that the rest of the world should become aware of the current situation of Kashmiri literature also, because lots of stuff is being written in Kashmiri. Though the language itself is declining because very few people speak it, because we cannot earn them an income or anything. But as far as writing is concerned, there is an outpouring of writings. Because of all the turmoil, people feel that they have to express themselves. And I wanted that the rest of the world should know about these phenomena, these concerns and other things. And also to know that this small place has also produced literature which is comparable to other literatures in the country. And also that once they were translated into English, then they could be translated into regional languages. And the rest of the country would also know this. And my first book of Kashmiri short story translations I deliberately called The Stranger Beside Me. Because I thought that Kashmir is beside you, it's very close to you, but still continues to be a stranger. So that was my main motivation.
Thank you. I think the whole idea of dilemma is something that I would like to talk about, and that is that do you have the right to translate from a language in which you're really not well versed in, or which is not your mother tongue, which you do not have that kind of affinity to? You haven't been brought up in that language, because that is my dilemma. I consider myself primarily in this particular context a person who writes in English, a person who thinks in English, a person who writes poetry in English. My association with both Marathi and Urdu is very peripheral, although I have translated quite a bit from both languages. I know the Urdu script barely. I can string it together, but not enough to give you, the direct sense of a line. If say, Iqbal says or if Faiz says, I can't do that. I have to rely on the Devanagari to be able to read Urdu. I do not know Urdu because what I know is Hindustani, which is what we all speak and what we have been brought up by watching Hindi films. I know Marathi because that is what we learned in school. Okay, and then I know Marathi because that is the milieu in which I am in, and that is the discourse of daily life. I know Marathi at a conversational level, but I haven't been brought up in the canons of Marathi. So this is the dilemma that I would like to present to you, from which I translate. But what I do translate is translate into English, where the source text, becoming in English, should stand by itself, should stand on its own. There are other dilemmas, but I think maybe the central one is something that I would like to put forth in front of you and maybe, if possible, discuss it.
Thank you. Both the speakers before me have spoken almost what I was going to say, because my motivation to translate into English was that Konkani, my mother tongue, though, as Mr. Muslim says, I do not think in Konkani because I was not born here, but I love the language, and because of the hand-holding that Damodar Mauser did to me, and his urging me to translate, and I felt that the level of Konkani that he wrote, the initial stories that I was exposed to in Konkani were written by him. The level was comparable to the best anyway, but none of the people around seemed to appreciate that, because that was also a time of strife for Konkani, when the government in power was saying that Konkani is a dialect of Marathi and all that. So I felt that the voice of Konkani had to be heard, and since I had a certain amount of competence in English, I decided to take up the challenge. And I think it is a dilemma because it is also problematic. The time that I began the translation, there wasn't much of help coming forth. There weren't dictionaries that would straight away give me the answers. The computer certainly wasn't there. But by asking my way around, getting the feel, I managed, and I'm happy to say that I did begin on that journey.
Thanks, Xavier. Recently, I felt annoyed, I think, Xavier, here, by taking one of Damodar Mauser's stories and comparing, and I started comparing them. Because Xavier had done one translation. I think earlier Mukesh Thali had done a translation. Sachin Pairaikar, sorry. And before that, I had done a translation of Damodar Mauser's Teresa's Man. it has been recently released, with Teresa's Men being the title of the story. Teresa's Men and Other Stories. And there you will understand one of my problems when I get to translating. Too many people seem to think that a translator should be faithful. Yes, it should be faithful, but faithful to whom? I am not married to the writer. For me to be faithful to him, I think. But I have a very sharp eye to the reader, towards the reader. And if and only if I am primarily doing a service to the reader who is going to buy the book, I think I will do justice in a way to the writer. You know, since I'm primarily a Konkani translator, there has developed over a period of time a kind of standard Konkani and standard literary Konkani, and that is made up of very short sentences. Okay? And at random, I'm going to open this book and pick up a passage somewhere. Listen. Reme, Fulameshri's son. He's flying to Kuwait tonight. He must be at Bombay airport right now. The flight takes off at 1:30, just a short while from now. I don't think English style really is that standard English literary style. In Konkani, if that were to be read out to you, you will find it very pleasing to the ear. But in English, I find it too staccato, too short, and irritating. Now, I appreciate the translator. Vidya is there. The line which I had read out is, she's sitting just right there behind the mouse over there. I'm not blaming her in any sense, by the way. She is being faithful in her own way to the writer. Because the sentence structures which were written in that book were just like that, the thing which I had read. But I wouldn't have done that. I would have probably made one or two sentences out of that entire paragraph. Am I doing right? Am I doing wrong? Give it to the writer, somebody who has read both might say yes, you have copied the writer very faithfully. Somebody else who doesn't know Konkani at all, I feel might find sentences which I construct much more soothing. Now this is a dilemma which I personally go through every day. Am I doing this right? Am I cheating on him? Or am I doing him a favor? So, I'd like to maybe pass this thought around for the others.
I must thank each member of the panel because they have brought out a series of dilemmas for us. If you notice, the first dilemma that a translator encounters is between creativity, that is a challenge to go into translation, and the economic viability of translation as a profession or what we are doing. She says, there is great writing, experience, quality of writing in Kashmiri is high, but still It is a language that is not surviving as it should, and yet people write, and it perhaps may not sell as we would like to use the word. Okay, this is one dilemma. The second is, I'm not born to a language. It's not my native language. Do I have the moral right to do? Everybody says competence in 2 languages at least is a must. I think my personal view is whether you're born to a language or not, you have to be assimilated of the 2 cultures. If you're close to them, if you have found the pulse of the cultural milieu, you mentioned the word, then I think we have the right. Because a translator also is not forcing himself to translate something. The work draws him as much unless it is a forced labor. So I think if he feels comfortable, if she feels comfortable, let that go. Then there is another one that comes, and that is the complexity of the idiom. Competence in the target language is sometimes prohibited, and how do we go about it? And the final one that Augusto mentioned, the problem of faithfulness. In translation theory, generally there is a mention of the faithfulness and felicity. Where should you go? Felicity is what is the soothing, the proper thing for a reader to have as his right. And I think if we understand one simple fact that the 2 languages, the source language and the target language, to my mind, differ in this. In structure, style and semiotics, one language is different from the other. And in semantic and lexical level, with regard to words and with regard to meaning, they may be saying the same thing. But the style of saying, the arrangement of sentences, words, phrases, etc., in 2 languages are different. We have to uphold the character of the target language with regard to style, with regard to structure, with regard to semiotics. Because if I had to translate, I think a concept like, say, Waterloo, I might just as well use the word Panipat for it, if it is not used historically. If somebody met his Waterloo in an emotional situation, I can very well say, that's a Panipat, sir, and it will carry. So I have changed the semiotics by remaining faithful to the idea. I think discretion is the better part of translationary valor as well. And that brings us to something else. She said in beginning that I consider translation as parkaya pravesh, because a translator enters the kind of the corpus of another work. But what comes out, she says, is not kaya kalp, because we think of kaya kalp as something better. But why should we think of it as better? Why not think that it is different? There can never be a translation which is identical to the original. Not because of the translators or the writers' lack or strength. It is because of the nature of the process and the nature of the 2 languages. So how about Kaya Kalp as another version, another take on the original? What do you think? Look at it like this and answer.
I'm not going to get into the Kaya Kalp dilemma.
Yeah. You can say what you think.
I'm talking, I think I will tell you
Yeah,
about
please.
my own dilemma.
Please.
You see, Kashmiri is an entirely different language from English, as you can guess. It's quite different from other Indian languages also, because structurally it is like, the syntax is like Sanskrit. And it's not like Hindi or Urdu that way. And there's to translate it into English, you have to sort of follow your instinct also. Something I feel. That if you are competent in 2 languages, you get into the habit of thinking simultaneously in those 2 languages. Particularly if you come across a sentence which carries a well-known Kashmiri proverb or idiom in it, then there is a dilemma. But I try to resolve it by sometimes literally translating that proverb also, because it gives a kind of a new flavor to the thing. At least people get to know the way people's minds work. So, but another dilemma that I have is when I try to translate mystic poets. You see, mystic poets themselves have a dilemma, because they are communicating something which is essentially uncommunicated. Because it's a kind of an intuitive process, it's a kind of a spiritual journey that they are making, and for that, I need vocabulary, resolved it because they are very skillful, because they are very articulate, they have resolved it. But for me, it becomes a problem sometimes because sometimes I have to familiarize myself with the particular practice in that kind of discipline. Because for instance, Nalda is steeped in Kashmir Shaivism. So you have to know something about what the concept of Shunya means to the Kashmiri Shaiv as opposed to what it means to the Buddhist. So for that, see, those are the challenges and the dilemmas which I try to resolve to the best of my capacity. But at least I think I have a right to translate London because her language and my language are the same. It is her mother tongue, it is my mother tongue. And I do that, but with these contemporary writers, I don't find it difficult because as I told you that Kashmiris don't write staccato sentences. They are more leisurely, they have long-minded. Sometimes, of course, you have to take the liberty of changing the sentence structure, but you can't play with the meaning. I've seen translations where people think that their own creativity has improved the text. That is why I objected to Kaya Siddhartha, because that was in that context. But otherwise, I try to be faithful, but I also sometimes use an English proverb instead of the Kashmiri proverb because it suits that context better. And so far, I think by many of these are living authors whom I translate, so far they are also competent in English because English is the medium of instruction in Kashmiri. So far, I haven't had any objections. In fact, I sent the first draft to the author for his comments, and so far, but I admire the courage of people like you who dare to translate when they don't know the original language. But it's been done. It's been done before. Maybe you understand the idea better.
Before that, please forgive me, but give me a translation of Parkaya, Pravesh, and I am not familiar
Because
with that.
Parkaya Pravesh, literally speaking, I am not explaining the concept because then it would be thrusting the concept on something. It is entering another body or bodies. Okay? Generally a body that does not have life. Because if I use the word transmigration of soul, it will bring in philosophy. That is not what is meant. So actually the translator gets into under the skin of the work, and what he creates is, whether he likes or not, the kaya, the body, is changed because it is put in different linguistic and therefore different cultural context, whether he likes it or not. So that is what I thought. And you can see that she has brought home to us another problem. A dilemma could be, if you are not taking the writer into confidence, in the sense you are not showing him your draft and sending it to the publisher, that could be a dilemma. That is professional versus ethics, professional ethics versus success.
And what do you do if your writers are all dead? Because that is my dilemma. I have only translated one living writer, whom I could sit next and kind of first listen to a lot of abuse from while you are doing the thing. But I have also translated Abdul Rahim Khan Khan, and now you can't go and ask him. No,
Talking of the
no, but but all the you have used several key words which I completely agree with, and I would just like to put 2 or 3 dilemmas also in front of you. One is not exactly a dilemma, but something that I believe in. There are some authors which we have known and loved intensely and internalized, but then it's only through translation. Gabriel Garcia Marquez is one. Okay. Umberto Eco for me is another. Okay. Asterix comics for that matter. They are masterpieces of English comedy. I don't know that. But in English they are fabulous. Their wordplay and things like that are as good as sometimes, hitting the high notes that P.G. Woodhouse gets. That sort of thing. But they are all translated. And in fact, you have to read the name of the translator, Anthea Bell, so that you know whose work that really is. Now, the fact is that how many people will know both languages so that they can appreciate where it has come from and where it has gone. In the sense, if you know both languages, you might as well read the original.
Yes.
But we are looking at translating for people who know nothing of the old language, and what they will gain is only from the target language. In my case, English. I'm sure that's everybody translates into English. So in English, the integrity of the text becomes paramount. Because I know one thing, and if you have read bad translations, you know they are literal. And it kind of hits you instantly that, I'm an architect, and a very important architect called Frank Lloyd Wright used to say this about bad architecture. He says it hurts my teeth. And this is, I'm sure you will recognize this if you're a translator. If something is wrong, it will hurt your teeth. So in English, it has to sound correct. Yeah, this is one thing. My other dilemma is, I don't know whether any of you are doing it, I translate poetry. Okay, so I translate Iqbal, I translate Faiz or Rahim and so on, and they are essentially very structured things. Poetry in Urdu is in couplets and it rhymes and it has its, it has its own cadences and syllable schemes and things like that. And I have found that it just doesn't work in English. Keki Daruwala recited a beautiful translation of Faiz over here, in which he tried to do what I cannot do, and that is to put everything in its proper rhyme schemes and things like that. And whereas it was beautiful, it still hurt my teeth a bit. On the other hand, if you want to capture the essential spirit of the thing, when it comes into English, I have always felt that free verse is sort of much better. Okay, and I don't know, maybe I can just give you one small example of that. Just a couplet again. Okay, this is by Faiz, and he's written several of these quatrains, and they are very, very beautiful and melodious. And if you try to translate it in exactly the verse kind of form, it can be done, I'm sure, but it cannot be done consistently. So this is one of his most famous couplets. Faiz says, "रात यूं दिल में तेरी खोई हुई याद आई, जैसे वीराने में चुपके से बहार आ जाए, जैसे सहरा में हौले से चले बादे नसीम, जैसे बीमार को बेवजह करार आ जाए." Spectacular, my hair stands even when I read it. Now, if you put this into a rhyme scheme in English, I have a feeling you will kill it. So I don't do that. What I do instead is I keep a much more freer translation, because, and you can judge me on this, it needs to sound proper in English. Last night, thoughts of you once lost rent my heart again, like clandestine spring, blooming in a garden laid waste, like the sweet morning breeze slowly soothing the desert, like an ailing soul feeling fine for no reason at all. So I got this experience first when I started translating Iqbal, because I have translated his two long poems, Shikwa and Jawab-e-Shikwa. And of course, I looked at earlier translations, and there is a very famous 1980 translation by Khushwant Singh, and very popular. It's a book which keeps getting published year after year after year. It's there outside if you want. And Khushwant Singh has translated it with the rhyme scheme. Okay, and it kept sounding stilted. And this is no judgment on Khushwant Singh. The reason it kept sounding stilted was that if you read what Iqbal is writing in Shikwa and Jawab-e-Shikwa, there is an underlying anger. Okay, and that anger sort of becomes aesthetized when you start to put it into a rhyme scheme in English. You know, that anger goes from anger to beauty. And I thought that somehow, you know, that spirit is to a certain extent diluted. So I, of course, went to the original text, reading Iqbal reciting reading Iqbal's Shikwa, which is his kind of direct rant against Allah for the state of Muslims in the country. You know, that whole idea of rant is central to the long poem.
Is it against the state of Muslims or against the people?
No, it's against the state of Muslims in India at that time. And not only Muslims in India, Muslims globally. Because the power of Muslims was waning very rapidly everywhere. Okay. Now, this is the thing, you know, that what do you do when you're translating poetry? Do you not need to have the spirit to be conveyed rather than the structure to be conveyed? So this is a dilemma which I have.
Mr. Dalvi has faced a dilemma and he has solved it. Fortunately, I don't have that dilemma to solve because a large body of work that I have done is mainly from Mauzo, who doesn't really write poetry, it's prose, which is also my strength. But at one point in one novella that he wrote, there was a sequence of a song, and then I was really stumped because I used to read poetry in school, and I said, how do I translate this? It was a song, not a high-grade poetry, a poem as such, but then I had to take the help of another person to render it into poetic form. And as far as getting into the skin of the story of the writer, I think a translation has to stand by itself. It is really a transcreation. And in fact, a couple of days back when I was traveling with Mahabaleshwar Sail, a Konkani novelist and quite a prolific writer, he said, to translate is so difficult. Like, his works have been translated mainly by Vidya Pai. He said, "Khoob work karu padta, khoob kosht karu padta." You have to do a lot of work, you have to do a lot of suffering, you have to suffer a lot to translate. And I really appreciate it, he said. And then after some time, he came up, the conversation changed. And then he said, you know one thing, a translator and a writer is being paid on par by the publishers. I said, do you find that ironic? He said, no, they deserve it, of course. But the fact is, he probably felt that, and anybody else would feel that the writer should get more than the translator. But as I have said before, Bai has, Damodar Mauzo has rattled off his stories at one sitting, most of them, sometimes in 2 hours or 4 hours flat. And I've struggled over the translation over many days.
Thanks. I'll continue with this problem which Mr. Dalvi had. That is that of translating poetry. It's very difficult to do that, and I try to keep away from it. The reason is that it takes ages to do it. It takes months till you get it right. If you are just translating word for word, then but you've got to really get inspired to figure out how to crack this puzzle. But I've done that occasionally, and sometimes it takes a lot of time. Problem is that there too, if the writer uses rhythm and music to convey his thoughts, how do you do that? And a lot of these poets actually do this. When they use the figure of metaphors and similes, then I feel a little more confident at doing it. When they want you to listen to the sound. Oh, it truly is it's a challenging task. I'll leave it.
Criminal if I don't offer a comment on what has been said, because I do translate poetry and enjoy doing that. I don't know if the readership does. But I will say that the main problem stems because the languages are different in nature. We most of the time take the Indian languages into English. I'm talking of Indo-Aryan languages in a way. The meter of the two languages cannot be matched. The structures are different. But I think one tries to keep as close as possible to the rhythm that you capture. But you bring that rhythm into the natural rhythm of the target language. Sometimes the lines are such, the compactness of words is such that automatically it comes into English also. I'm just mindful of a line and a half I remember when I was translating Manohar Rai's synthesized poetry. He was describing Yamuna and he used Sanskritized terms in Konkani. And if I remember the line correctly, he said, Dik Vasana, Drut Charana, Hiche Dege, Ramatavati, Jadabarana, something, Yuvati, whatever. And the line came into English in a very, very, apt kind of a rhyming, metrical mode. But that doesn't happen always. So I think using the blank verse is quite alright, provided you bring the rhythm. And since you mentioned Urdu poetry, I must also say, Ghalib has been sometimes rendered in 3 language translations. And many a time you have wondered why Ghalib has been sacrificed at the cost of poetry. So the essence, the spirit shouldn't die. And I think our dilemma now is to wrap this up without hurting the sentiments of the speakers. And I think we may not be able to take a question. Yes, of course.
About translating poetry. I'm translating these Kashmiri women mystic poets. One of them wrote in the Boogie and the other one the 70s. See, their verses are not rhymed always, but there is a rhythm. And that is what I try to imitate. And I must compliment you that you have made this mass translation that rhythm, even though there is no rhyme, but it is poetry.
Anybody have question you can ask?
Yeah. Such
Or even if you have a rejoinder, because ultimately what we want is enrichment of ourselves.
Yeah, Vidya.
I think he has some satisfaction because some of your original writers and you also do original writing. So you have a satisfaction after what you write. Then when you are doing the translation, when you are the end product. So is there a difference between them? Is it more critical? The translator's satisfaction that you get after the end. Is it different as a creative original writing
Yes,
and
it is. I'll tell you my personal. I have never translated as a commission, in the sense that nobody has told me you translate that. Okay, I have never done that, which means that all the translation I have done is self-generated. Okay, that it has got published is sheer luck, nothing else. Alright. Now, why do you translate? You talk about criticality and things like that. As far as I am concerned, the only reason I translate is the sheer pleasure of doing it. Okay, the enjoyment in doing the translation for me supersedes everything. Of course, you do research later on, you try to understand context and allusions and things like that. But the reason you are translating is you are working with 2 languages simultaneously. Okay, and it's a delight. So for the time you are capturing the spirit, you are bringing it out. In a sense, it compensates for the barren periods when poetry in the language you want to write just does not come. But like I said, it's done for pleasure, at least as far as I'm concerned.
No, I want to say I also do it entirely for pleasure. I'm not a big commission.
Yeah.
I do it for pleasure, and when you finish a story, there is a great sense of satisfaction.
What happens if the writer, a living writer, he tells you this is very good English, but it's not the way I want it in. The same story about your shots. We're not talking about Bhai. But the point is, if the writer says this is very good English, but this is not exactly my Konkani was short, sweet sentences. This doesn't express what we want. And the translation, now what is the point of the translation? I want it published. I don't want the writer to hold me up. I spent an adequate time. This happened very early, so in my career. So I learned my lesson. I'm faithful to my writers. Because the whole point is, I'm aiming at getting this book to a wider audience. I'm not looking at just this book. My point is Konkani has to be published as much as it can so that other people can recognize the creative work here. If the writer tells you this is very good English, but this is not the way I wanted it, and he holds you up, I'm willing to revise my work.
I'll just respond to this in one sentence. I have had the experience, the pleasure of sitting with an author whose work I'm translating, Hemant Dimte, who is a very good Marathi poet, whose work I'm translating into English. And this has happened on occasion that he says that, I understand what you are writing in English, but this is not what I had in mind. Then I agree with you. You do that. Okay, you try to convey what the author wants conveyed because he's there and he can tell you what it is. And then, of course, you have to work it in English in a way that his version of things comes out. It happens occasionally.
Thanks, you asked that because I was pointing to Kiran to give the mic to me because this was the precise thing which I wanted to talk about. I forgot about it earlier. You see, when I was very young, that is not very young, okay, about my 20s, I started this job when I was a student. And at that time there weren't any translations of it might have been, but they were very rare. So I started this series of translations of people who are nowadays, universally recognized by everybody. Kudlik Naik, Damodar Mauzo, there were others as well. So at that time I had no clue about that you need permissions from the writer, or I didn't have any idea about Copyright Act. So I did that, gave them to the editor, who was a well-known poet. He should have known actually, but he just published them. Okay. Nowadays I would be a little hesitant about doing that unless I'm confident that the writer himself would have approved and published. And I do give it to them. But if I find that they don't comment on my, they don't object to anything that I've done. So I don't know.
See,
That's the way I.
the feeling of the original poem or prose, it will be better expressed by the translator. Will it be good?
Yeah. Yes, I think so.
Well, their translation may not work much. Suppose you work upon the feeling of the author who wrote the original poem or story, whatever it is.
Okay, you mean you start adapting the.
The translator works upon it, understands the feeling of the reader, but express in a better manner than the author himself. Will it be a good or bad? Morally speaking.
I think earlier on somebody was, Dalby I think mentioned, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. People who have read both the translations, the Spanish one as well as this is a great book, but this is not what Marquez has written.
True.
Do we know about that?
No, but what happens today, these translations, I'm only speaking about Konkani. Now you've got it at the university level, and they say this, they're reading both the Konkani and the English one, and they're telling you that this has not been done here, it might have, this has been left out, this is not exactly tallying and all that stuff. So we don't have the right to, I mean, where does this work? Like he says, this was an improvement. I mean, taking off on his point, how do you solve this?
Just briefly, the problem lies sometimes with the fact that the source language might not have very good editors. You were self mentioning this, I remember in your session. And then, what do you do? I mean, Xavier had that experience when the editors of Rupa went and drastically change some of his work. I find it was good.
Between Katha, right?
Katha, I always think that.
But Katha doesn't, I mean, we are coming down to absolute, what will I say, things that we've been through as translators. Katha does it. Because the point is you are looking at an English reading public, and the translation is, it has to be acceptable in the culture of readership in English. I've been told that also. But then later on, at the university level, if you are also told that it's not absolutely faithful. Because a lot of this happens, English language publishing houses also put certain amount of, restrictions or expectations. They do change it.
Yeah,
you're stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea, between the rock and a very hard place. We've gone through these experiences and we can't say anything, right? Because my ultimate aim is I need to be published. I'm not going to go forward.
Sorry to interrupt. I think the point you initially made was that the author himself was not satisfied that you had done it faithfully. I would agree with Mr. Dalvi. Sit with him, do it to his satisfaction, so there were no. In his case, he has translated people who are no longer alive. That option is not available for him. For us, most of the time, that option is available.
Besides, when you talk about translation from one language into English or Hindi, which generally we know. My novel is translated into Telugu and Tamil and Odia. I never know how it is done.
Correct.
Yeah.
Just 2 points. One is that because these are two completely different languages, I think the phrase better would not apply. Okay, they are different things. Okay, and the other thing which you said is that ultimate faithfulness is, I think, an ideal. For the very same reason that these are two different languages, I don't think that ultimate faithfulness is ever achieved, because it itself is a non-entity. Ultimate faithfulness. I think ultimately there is a great amount of subjectivity, great amount of appreciation from, say, all of us with our different backgrounds. Even if we were all English speaking or English thinking people, may appreciate the same text differently. So I think that we have to allow a certain amount of expansiveness in its appreciation.
I think the discussion has become very interesting, but since we are running out of time, we will need to wrap it up. One important thing, at some point, we should not mix up the translation theory and the actual work that we are doing. I think it will be the best thing for the translator to go ahead and do what he's doing and leave it to the readership to judge. Even getting the approval of the writer is only relative, because sometimes the writer may not be the best judge in English or in any language. So I think, but we must keep him informed and get his view. So with these few words, I thank the panel. They have been very, very inspiring, and I think it helped those who were interested. Thank you very much, and we thank you all.